You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
What happens when the USDA pulls life-saving climate data off its website without warning or explanation? When small farmers, already battered by extreme weather and shifting markets, suddenly lose access to the very tools designed to help them survive? Welcome to the One Bite is Everything podcast. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and here is where we connect the dots from the food on your plate to pretty much everything else in the world. Today is no exception. In this episode, I'm talking with Wes Gillingham, farmer, policy advocate, and president of the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York, about what's really going on behind the scenes in American agriculture right now. From climate funding freezes to New York's good food purchasing bill, Wes helps us trace the ripple effects of policy decisions that rarely make headlines but shape what ends up on our plates. You'll hear about a bold lawsuit that forced the USDA to restore deleted information and why schools and hospitals can't legally choose better food. This isn't just a New York story, it's a national wake-up call. And if you eat, live in a community, or care about the future, this conversation is one you can't afford to miss.
So I'm living here in the Western Catskills on Wild Roots Farm. It's a farm my wife and I started 30 years ago, and we grew organic vegetables for many years, and we ran a CSA, a community supported agriculture operation. We've fed 150 families for a bunch of years, but then we were faced with the impacts of climate change through 200-year floods and a 500-year flood in a 5-year period. And right around that same time, I got involved with, starting an environmental organization called Catskill Mountain Keeper, which led into all sorts of politics and fighting things beyond farming. But the original goal was to help enhance local small farms within the region and keep them in business and to protect the land. Farmers are stewards of the land. Right now, I'm currently the president of Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York.
How does your work with Catskill Mountain Keeper and your work with NOFA, how do they support each other, or do they have any varying agendas?
Yeah, I think, Catskill Mountain Keeper supports multiple bills that NOFA has been working on recently or even for years.
Catskill Mountain Keeper and the Northeast Organic Farming Association, or NOFA, are powerhouses for sustainable agriculture and community resilience in the Catskill region of New York. United by a passion for protecting the environment and supporting local farmers, they collaborate on initiatives like the Climate Farming Solutions Program, where they help farmers adapt to the challenges of climate change. NOFA also hosts hands-on workshops that teach everything from organic gardening to land access, empowering farmers to adopt sustainable practices and build thriving local food systems. NOFA advocates for policies that protect farmland, foster sustainable farming, and create model farms that serve as living classrooms for the next generation of farmers. Through their combined efforts, these two organizations are proving that when communities, farmers, and environmental organizations work together, they can create a future where agriculture, sustainability, and local food systems thrive.
The two entities really contribute to each other in multiple ways. We're both involved in multiple coalitions across the state, working for good food policy, protecting the land, encouraging small-scale farming. One of the most exciting things about New York State, as one of the major agricultural states in the country, is that we are made up mostly of small farms, and way more small farms than any other state that is in the top 10 in ag production. So that's really hopeful. Some of that is just topography, New York State and the hills and valleys and mountains versus, big, flat, productive soil areas. But that really comes down to farmers also just being able to take care of the land that they're stewarding and keep it in business. It's not easy.
What are the top priorities for the organizations you're working on right now?
So most recently, we've been in Albany talking to legislators about one that's really exciting. People are always trying to stop something that government or somebody's doing. But the other one is the Good Food Purchasing Bill, which is a bill that would enable institutions such as schools, hospitals, municipalities. The background of that is right now they're mandated to take the lowest bid to buy their food, their products, and this would allow them to spend more money, up to 10% more on a product if it qualifies under a series of value categories. And the top one is local. So again, it doesn't make any sense for an agricultural state like New York, it's one of the major meat producers, has the most organic beef, most organic cows in the country. It's a major producer, and we should be buying those products within our state instead of shipping stuff in from California or Washington State or someplace anywhere between. So it's a real common sense bill. It passed last year in both houses, but then ended up getting vetoed by the governor for some pretty unknown reasons. We're still trying to figure out why. So there were some changes that were made to the bill that the governor cited as reasons, but we made some of those changes and are pushing it again. And again, it's a no-brainer. We should be buying local food, high quality food. People get better faster if you're in a hospital. I mean, my memory, the couple times I was in a hospital, that was not known for the good food. My son just went and had an issue and ended up in a hospital when we were visiting my cousins in Maine. And oh my gosh, all of my relatives came to visit in the hospital, and we all ate lunch in the cafeteria because they had good food there. It was night and day difference. So the state is mandating that you have to buy the cheapest food and not necessarily good quality. I always use the analogy, if you walk in a grocery store and hang out there for a little while and you watch the people come up to the produce, they don't sit there and reach for that cantaloupe in the back that looks sort of like an old sponge. They take the best quality produce, and that's what they want to buy. So why wouldn't we enable our institutions, if that's a priority for the institution, to feed the people that they're serving better product? This is all about freedom of choice more than anything. If an institution does not want to spend that extra money because they need to buy computers that year for their fifth graders, they don't have to. It's not a mandate. But if they're sitting there looking at the fact that their kids are performing better, they're learning faster, they're performing on the statewide tests better, if you're feeding them good food, enable them to spend that extra bit of money on that. And what's more important than healthy kids? It makes for a healthy future for our whole culture.
Well, there's a lot going around about that from the federal level at the moment, which is interesting rhetoric, meaning let's make our kids healthy again. But at the same time, we're canceling some of these bigger federal programs that are getting food to kids in school, especially foods from small farms like you're talking about across the country, and to food banks. So I always find these are very important conversations to have, but there are some actions out there where some of the cuts that have been happening to federal programming that support farmers and that support real food have taken a hit.
Yeah, back in February, filed a lawsuit against the USDA because they were taking climate change data down off of their website, and they were doing it in an illegal manner. A administration has the ability to decide what they want to focus on and how they're communicating that through their different agencies.
In a bold and vital legal battle, the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York, NOFA-NY, stepped up to challenge the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, for removing crucial climate-related information from its websites. In 2025, the USDA quietly deleted resources essential to farmers, guidance on climate-smart farming, federal loan programs and tools like the Climate Risk Viewer, which were key to helping farmers adapt to the growing climate crisis. The removal, done without public input or transparency, sparked a fierce lawsuit filed by NOFA-NY alongside the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC, and the Environmental Working Group, or EWG, arguing that the USDA's actions violated federal transparency laws. Supported by Earth Justice and the Night First Amendment Institute, the coalition won a decisive victory, forcing the USDA to restore the deleted content and pledge to follow proper legal procedures in the future. This victory not only ensures farmers have continued access to life-saving resources, but also underscores NOFA-NY's unwavering commitment to safeguarding sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, and the future of farming. It's a powerful reminder that when communities come together to fight for what's right, they can hold even the most powerful institutions accountable.
But in this case, they just took information off, which is basically against the law, the American Procedures Act and another statute. But they took the information down about climate change and some really important tools that farmers and foresters and fishermen can use to plan for climate resilience. There were pages on there which told you what you were, a practice that was eligible for grants or loans to be more climate resilient. Well, what's more important in this day and age as we're facing these climate impacts to actually plan for that. So removing that information, to quote Trump, it's not a hoax. Climate change is here and it's real and it's impacting farmers, foresters, fishermen know that better than anyone. We deal with it on a day-to-day basis. Understanding climate and how we respond to it is something farmers have always done. So now with the drastic impacts from extreme weather events and such, we need to have those resources. One of the things that was taken down off the website was this tool that you could look at the propensity for forest fires or flooding. So you could plan I might not want to lease that field because it's really vulnerable to flooding. And the weather has changed in New York State. We're getting, 40% more rain than we've had. I mean, I'm still struggling this year right now with trying to get in the field and plow because we've had so much rain. The rain is leaching nitrogen out of the soil. It's doing all sorts of things. It's something you have to adjust to. So I've changed some of my practices over the last 10 years. And some of that information came from looking at websites and techniques. And then there was a whole series of funding cuts through the USDA that the USDA was making available to farmers and then also organizations to educate about practices and things that you can do, cover cropping, riparian buffers, all those kinds of things that enable a farmer to thrive during extreme weather events. And then the most crazy one that they took down, which is downright evil, is how can a farmer get help after an extreme weather event? And sorry for the sheep, but see, they're agreeing with me.
They're very excited about this issue.
The farmers aren't eligible for the same kind of funds from FEMA like the average person is because of the USDA grants and crop insurance and things like that. But a lot of small farmers in New York do not get crop insurance, and they rely on assistance from NRCS or FSA, Farm Service Agency, or the Natural Resources Program. So they rely on those funds when something extreme happens. And all of a sudden having that information taken down, it made no sense whatsoever. That's why we sued right away immediately. It's because that's crazy to just remove that tool for farmers.
And you think that farmers are using this across the country to see sort of where they stand, what might be coming? It's like the new Farmer's Almanac, but with more specifics?
Well, it's available to both farmers and then also, institutions or organizations. So like NOFA-New York was running a program, Transition to Organic program, enabling farmers to transition to organic. And there's a whole education piece around that. And having the funding removed for the education piece, that farmers could get connected to that information on the website through an organization, whether it was NOFA or the Cornell Cooperative Extension. I mean, Cornell has lost a bunch of funding in this past 100 plus days. And I mean, it's a triple whammy for farmers is really what it comes down to. You've got information disappearing, you've got people being laid off, and then funding either frozen or cut. So if you are somebody that went out as a farmer, got a grant that was awarded, and the way it usually works with those kinds of grants is you purchase or pay somebody to do something for what you do, then you have to refund it through an invoice to the government.
I just want to hop in here with a little side note about what's going on with the For Farmers movement. For Farmers has launched a campaign called One for Farmers, which is a campaign where we get 1 million people each to donate $1. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up here is that the $1 million that we intend to raise will help to fill the gap for the farmers who were approved for USDA grants that were then rescinded. So those farmers who have already spent funds against their contract with the USDA, and the USDA has failed to provide them with reimbursement. Those farms and farmers will be eligible for grants as part of the One for Farmers campaign. So I hope that while you're listening to this episode, you will think about donating $1 to One for Farmers and to the farmers who need our support, and that you'll ask your friends to join you as well. I will leave a link to the campaign in the show notes.
So there were farmers that were out there, had purchased things, had work done on their farm by a contractor, and now the government is saying, well, we don't know if we're going to pay you. And they're like, it's a straight up violation of a contract. That's what sparked both Josh Riley and Cory Booker to put in their bills, fulfill the contract. Those are going on the federal level. But that, and then the fact, if you're one of those farmers that either had the funds frozen or cut, you call your local office to try to find out what happened or why, and nothing's there because either they don't know in the local office because they're not being told by the other office, or there's nobody there to take your phone call and nobody's answering it. There was a mandate, all the USDA, everybody has to report to the office. No more remote work, went across some of the states. Well, if you're in North Dakota and there's only a couple offices across the whole state, there's a lot of USDA officials working remotely because they can interact directly with the farmers in their community, in the county. Well, all of a sudden, they all have to report. Number one, there's not enough desks at the office for them to work at, but then they're completely out of contact with the farmers on the ground who are dealing whatever extreme situation they have.
So we're missing the climate data, but we're also missing the support for farmers to transition their farms in a way that it's more climate resilient. And we're missing support for farmers in the form of employees at the USDA who are there and meant to be supporting farmers.
Exactly. Then you have this other situation. You have information coming out from Brooke Rollins saying, oh, we're here to help all the small farmers, and that's our agenda. That was something I just saw in the news recently. The reality is they were just reinstituting programs that have existed for years. So it's not like this new thing, but they're taking credit for it like it's a new thing because they cut everything off a month ago.
I shared that information with folks via social media just to see what small farmers were thinking about what she said. Oh, now we're going to help small farmers, and hundreds of responses, and really just like, show it to me in writing. Show me exactly what you're going to do because I don't actually believe it. And that's really from a national perspective. Folks are saying like, I don't get it. And then sort of talking about like, okay, so if you were at the USDA, what would you do to help small farmers? What specifically? And the number one answer was to reinstate those grants.
Yeah, I mean, the funding that has gone for some of the climate smart commodity funding, the IRA funding, there was a whole series of funds that were going to various organizations, directly to some farms for really exciting things. So under the land access program, which, in the United States historically, the three big barriers you have if you want to start a farm is what's your market, where are you going to get your equipment, and what land are you working on, either leasing it or owning it. And there's a lot of people that need to get access to land because they can't afford to just go out and purchase 300-400 acres. There was an example of this organization that put together a grant. They got a grant. It was a sizable grant, multi-million-dollar grant, to do two things: to buy property and then set up infrastructure. So they were looking at three separate properties, all in contract to purchase them. This grant was awarded to them 2 years ago. They were purchasing three separate properties. They had over 300 farmers apply to be part of this cooperative farm program. So the idea was to take this 100-acre piece and this 200-acre piece and make it available for a collection of farmers who didn't have access to land. And then they were building some infrastructure, like a cooler, and putting some infrastructure on the property to support those farms to get started. Basically, what you're talking about is funding to go to growing new farmers. I mean, what's more important to that? The average age of a farmer is my age, which is, I am not a spring chicken anymore.
But also that infrastructure was really meant to be shared among those farmers, so they all don't need to buy the same exact tractor for their plot of land.
Yeah, and I don't know the details in terms of exactly how the funding was. One thing was to really set up infrastructure for like coolers and things like that, so they could all share cold storage when they were harvesting for whatever market they were working on.
And where was this?
This was in Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. Yeah, Brooke Rollins' state. And all of a sudden that funding was frozen.
Since taking office as the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture in early 2025, Brooke Rollins has implemented a series of controversial changes, including freezing state funding for agriculture and reevaluating diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, initiatives. Rollins initiated a comprehensive review of federal agricultural funding, leading to the suspension of significant grants, such as a $65 million climate-smart agriculture grant to Texas A&M AgriLife Research. While Rollins defended these actions as necessary to cut excessive administrative costs, the freeze has led to layoffs and concerns among sustainable farming advocates who worry about the impact on climate resilience efforts.
She was in contract, the person who runs this organization was in contract with real estate agents. Now, luckily, I've talked to her since then. Those real estate agencies didn't sue her for breaking the contract. They understood what was going on, but she was over a barrel, and that's ridiculous. And then she was particularly worried because it was about land access. It could have been interpreted as, DEI in some circles probably, because of the population she was serving. And that's crazy. Everybody's been talking about how the algorithm to identify programs that should be cut gets pumped out there. Well, diversity was one flag that they were associated. Well, diversity for a farm is pretty dang important. Having diverse crops is what keeps you afloat many years, not just relying on one cash crop, but having diverse methods, diverse crops, and it gets you by from one year to the next. And to have that be flagged as something, I would also make the argument, diversity in our culture is important too, but it's really important for farmers. And that's the kind of stuff that just makes me crazy.
Well, climate is another buzzword that gets caught in the algorithm machine there.
Yeah. And again, farmers know better than anybody else that climate change is real. It's happening. It's here now. And we have to adjust. And we have to do things to prevent it from getting worse. There's plenty of people out there that haven't bought into the actual science that's proven it, but bought into the fact that we're causing climate change. Even if you don't believe that we're the ones causing it, it's still happening. There's so much evidence that it's here. You could blame it on volcanoes or whatever you want, but it's something we need to adjust to. To call it a hoax and then remove any reference to that on government websites, that's just downright evil. That's thought control.
Where does that lawsuit stand?
So the USDA actually backed down. We were working with the Knight Center at Columbia University and Earth Justice. They were representing NOFA-New York, Environmental Working Group, and RDC. And they had filed for and were about to have a hearing for a temporary restraining order, which would force the government to put the information back up. And the USDA backed down and said, we'll put the information back up. I mean, basically what happened is they knew the protocol they used to remove the information. I mean, it was a easy win legally. Like they had blatantly not followed the legal procedures that they should have with that information. So the question now is, I know they did put a bunch of stuff back up, but are they going to fulfill the agreement, the court agreement, and actually put all of the information back up? So that's the next job, is to just make sure that is still happening. And I'm glad we have help from those other institutions on making sure that that happens.
So there's sort of legal challenges that can reinstate certain things. And then there are other ways that you're advocating for farmers in New York State, is through lobbying at the Capitol. What else?
Yeah, well, NOFA-New York is a support organization for agriculture in New York. And it's not just organic farmers. A lot of farmers use the NOFA website. A lot of farmers come to our workshops. There are a lot of farmers, under the USDA law, you can't say you're organic. You may be doing most or all of the practices that make you an organic farmer under the USDA, but unless you're USDA certified, meaning the inspector comes out and looks at your farm. So there are quite a number of NOFA members and NOFA farmers across the state that aren't organic. And then there's a lot of people that are conventional farmers that use the information that NOFA puts out in terms of cover cropping and things that can improve soil health. NOFA worked really hard a few years ago on getting the soil health bill passed in New York State, which was to create a culture of soil care. Over the years, we've kind of gotten away. A farmer looks at their soil and that's their bank account. That's what makes them successful as a business. And it's also what makes them fit into the ecosystem that they live in. A farmer is not just a steward of their farm. The impact of that farm goes way beyond their property line. So NOFA has been working really hard to enhance small farms in particular, not just organic, and also to really, really care for the planet more than anything, and the longevity of our society and having good, healthy food to eat. So yeah, we're very involved in that on a political level, and then also really strong education organization, getting the information out there for even local gardeners, come to NOFA to find out what's the best and latest way to enhance pollinators or multiple things out there. I've always said, and I'll say it 20 different ways, but a farmer is it's not just their property. They are impacting the ecosystem. If I'm taking care of my flood control on my property, I'm helping everybody downstream. And if I'm, spreading fertilizer at the wrong time or manure or whatever, if you spread it just before it rains, all of that washes away and pollutes the water. I mean, that can be a source of harmful algal blooms, a whole other issue that's impacting the state. The exciting thing is, my daughter's working on this community farm project where she's trying to create this education program. It's really geared towards education, bringing kids up to her farm, and kids get an experience with animals. They can look at the garden. There was even a case with kids from the local school. Here we are in a rural area, and there was a kid that didn't know potatoes came from underground. They thought you picked them off the potato plant. They came up and they picked potatoes. Luckily, where we are here in Livingston Manor, we have a food service person that's really excited about buying local and making better food. They came to the farm and did a program with the kids where he baked bread, locally sourced from New York State grains, and the kids got to experience how you knead the bread and put it together and cook it, and then they ate it. And lo and behold, after that, all of a sudden he had to start producing more bread in the school because the kids were eating more of it, because they had experienced it and learned where their food came from. That's a really important thing for any society to build into their youth.
Yes, I think consumer education is one of the most important pieces of having small farms survive. And small farms across the country are struggling. But when people start understanding the connection, that it's not, that, like you said, your land is everyone's land and you're the steward of that land. And when you're supporting a small farmer, you're supporting that as well. And I think the literacy on the part of consumers who are living in a modern society with a lot of things going on in their lives and just way more busy than we ever have been. And they go to the supermarket and there you go. There are the carrots that come from, 2,000 miles away while you have some 30 miles from you that could really support your own community. So I think those choices and making that obvious for kids. I mean, yeah, the kids are those consumers. They're like, we need more bread.
And that's a perfect segue for something I say very often. I hear people complain, oh, well, farmers get a bunch of subsidies. The big commodity, cotton, soy, and corn get the bulk of those subsidies. But when you go to the store and you buy that really cheap vegetable from Chile or wherever, you're subsidizing a poor practice on the land. You're subsidizing agribusiness that's potentially exploiting workers, exploiting the land, and exploiting a system that's a little geared towards greed and money versus supporting your local agriculture. So don't mean to make that sound so intense, but it is. I think really understanding the way our food system is set up is really not talked about. So it's really important for people to understand all the nuances of that.
Yeah. And just going back to some assumptions about with subsidies and whatnot, that subsidies for corn are for animal feed and ethanol. So it's not even feeding people. All of that fertile soil is not making fruits and vegetables for people to eat. And there's a lot of exports included in that. And I think people just don't really realize what's going on.
That was Wes Gillingham, farmer, advocate, and the kind of grounded truth teller we need more of right now. We talked about the USDA's quiet removal of critical climate resources from its website and how a lawsuit forced them to put it back. We learned about the Good Food Purchasing Bill, a common sense policy that would allow schools and hospitals to spend just a little bit more to buy better local food. As you go about your week, I hope you'll ask yourself, who's feeding you? What kind of system are you participating in, even unknowingly? And what small changes could you make today to support farmers doing the right thing? If this episode moved you or made you think, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps others discover the show and join the conversation. One Bite is Everything is produced by me with co-production by Sonia Dillon. Our sound design, engineering, and original music are by Russell Chapa. Thank you for listening and for caring. Until next week, I am your host, Diana DePrima, and this is One Bite is Everything.